On a crisp autumn afternoon in New York, the playground echoed with children's laughter. The CEO's daughter, Emily, sat quietly on the swing, watched over by her towering bodyguard. But in an instant, everything changed. A masked man appeared near the gate, moving with unsettling intent. The trained guard froze, distracted at the worst possible moment. Out of nowhere, a single dad, Daniel, a mechanic still in his oil-stained jacket, stepped in front of Emily, shielding her with his own body. He didn't have weapons, training, or orders. Just a father's instinct to protect any child in danger. That reckless act set off a chain of events that would drag Daniel into the CEO's world of power, wealth, and hidden enemies. What happened next would test loyalty, courage, and the meaning of family forever. The city of New York pulsed with its usual relentless energy, skyscrapers piercing the October sky like steel monuments to ambition. In the heart of Manhattan's most exclusive district, where penthouse apartments cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, Central Park offered a rare sanctuary of green among the concrete jungle. Here, the wealthy brought their children to play on pristine equipment, far from the gritty reality of the city's working neighborhoods. Grace Mitchell commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. At 34, she had built her tech empire from nothing, transforming a single software patent into a multi-billion-dollar corporation that employed thousands. Her tailored suits and sharp intelligence masked the exhaustion of a woman carrying impossible burdens. Behind the polished exterior lived a mother who barely saw her 8-year-old daughter awake during weekdays, whose nights were filled with hostile takeover attempts and industrial espionage. Emily Mitchell possessed her mother's piercing blue eyes but carried herself with the quiet sadness of a child who understood too much about adult worries. She spent her afternoons in the care of Marcus, a former military specialist whose credentials read like an action movie. 6 feet 4 inches of trained muscle, Marcus had protected diplomats in war zones and celebrities from stalkers. Yet Emily barely spoke to him, treating him as human furniture rather than a guardian. 20 miles away in Queens, Daniel Carter finished his shift at Murphy's Auto Repair, grease embedded under his fingernails from wrestling with a stubborn transmission. At 31, his weathered hands told the story of a man who earned every dollar through honest labor. His flannel shirt bore the stains of hard work, and his boots had walked countless miles on unforgiving concrete. Daniel knew nothing about stock options or corporate mergers, but he understood the weight of responsibility that came with raising a child alone. Josh Carter, 10 years old, with his father's brown hair and determined chin, waited patiently on the shop's front steps, homework spread across his knees. The boy had learned early that patience meant survival, that his father's long hours kept food on their table and a roof over their heads. Their 2-bedroom apartment might not have marble countertops or floor-to-ceiling windows, but it overflowed with laughter and the kind of love that couldn't be purchased with any amount of money. The distance between these 2 worlds measured more than geography. Grace's penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room, its minimalist furniture and abstract art speaking to tastes refined by wealth and education. Daniel's living room held second-hand furniture arranged around a television bought on clearance, its walls decorated with Josh's drawings and photos from Little League games. Both parents fought battles each day, but their weapons and battlefields couldn't have been more different. On this particular Friday afternoon, Daniel decided his son deserved something special. Josh had aced his math test and helped elderly Mrs. Rodriguez carry groceries upstairs without being asked. The city's most famous playground lay just a subway ride away, and Daniel figured they could afford one small adventure before the weekend arrived. Neither father nor son suspected they were walking toward a moment that would shatter the boundaries between 2 entirely different lives. The playground buzzed with the controlled chaos of childhood joy. Expensive strollers parked in neat rows, while nannies chatted in multiple languages, their charges climbing elaborate structures that cost more than most families' annual income. Daniel felt the familiar weight of not belonging, but Josh's face lit up at the sight of the towering slide and rope-climbing walls. That smile was worth any amount of discomfort. Emily sat alone on a swing designed for children half her age, her designer clothes somehow making her appear smaller and more vulnerable. She moved back and forth with mechanical precision, her eyes focused on the distance rather than the playground's excitement around her. Marcus stood 20 feet away, his attention split between his charge and a heated phone conversation that drew his focus like a magnet. The attack came without warning, as these things always do. A figure emerged from behind the maintenance building, his face concealed behind a black mask, his movements deliberate and predatory. He had studied Emily's routine for weeks, knew exactly when the bodyguard received his daily call from headquarters, understood the precise window of opportunity that negligence created. His employer had promised $10 million for a successful kidnapping, enough money to disappear forever once the job finished. Marcus remained absorbed in his conversation, gesticulating as he argued about overtime schedules and weekend assignments. The trained professional who could disarm a gunman in 3 seconds flat missed the danger approaching his charge by mere yards. His military training proved worthless against the simple distraction of bureaucracy and human error. Daniel noticed first because fathers learn to see danger everywhere. Some primal instinct, honed by years of protecting Josh from playground bullies and reckless drivers, triggered alarm bells in his mind. The masked figure moved wrong, his posture radiating menace that had nothing to do with maintenance work or park security. Emily remained oblivious, lost in whatever private sadness occupied her thoughts. Time slowed as understanding crystallized into action. Daniel didn't think about consequences or personal safety. He didn't consider his own vulnerability or the wisdom of confronting an unknown threat. His body moved before his mind could catalog the 1,000 reasons why someone else should handle this crisis. Mechanics' reflexes, trained by years of catching falling tools and dodging moving machinery, carried him across the playground in seconds. Emily looked up in confusion as Daniel's shadow fell across her swing. She saw a stranger with kind eyes and gentle hands, his work shirt telling a story completely different from the expensive suits that usually surrounded her. Daniel placed himself between the child and the approaching threat, his arms spread wide in a gesture that communicated protection without words. The masked figure hesitated, his carefully planned operation suddenly complicated by an unexpected variable. Daniel Carter hadn't appeared in any surveillance report or security briefing. This blue-collar hero represented the kind of unpredictability that professional criminals learn to fear above all else. Plans could account for guards and alarms and sophisticated security systems. They couldn't account for ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Marcus finally noticed the commotion, his phone call forgotten as training reasserted itself. But precious seconds had already elapsed, seconds that might mean the difference between success and catastrophe. The bodyguard's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, his body positioning itself for engagement, but Daniel had already become the shield that protected Emily from harm. The playground fell silent, except for the sound of Daniel's voice, calm but firm, speaking directly to the masked intruder. He didn't threaten or posture, or attempt to intimidate. Instead, he simply stood his ground, making it clear that any path to Emily led through him first. His presence communicated something more powerful than weapons or training. The absolute determination of a father protecting a child. Grace Mitchell's limousine arrived at that precise moment, her driver navigating through traffic with the efficiency that money could buy. She had left her office early for once, hoping to surprise Emily with an impromptu afternoon together before another weekend consumed by work obligations. Through the tinted window, she witnessed a scene that would haunt her memory forever. Her daughter sat frozen on the swing, while a complete stranger in oil-stained work clothes positioned himself as her protector. Marcus moved with professional efficiency, but Grace could see the guilt and embarrassment written across his face. He had failed in the most fundamental way possible, allowing danger to approach the one person he was paid to shield from harm. The masked figure retreated as quickly as he had appeared, melting back into the urban landscape like a shadow at sunset. Whether Daniel's intervention alone had deterred him, or whether Marcus's belated response had convinced him to abandon the attempt, nobody could say for certain. What mattered was that Emily remained safe, protected by the unexpected heroism of a man who owed her nothing. Grace emerged from her limousine with the bearing of a woman accustomed to command, her heels clicking against pavement as she approached the playground. Emily ran to her with tears streaming down her face, babbling about the scary man and the nice person who had stepped in front of her. Daniel stood awkwardly to one side, suddenly aware of his appearance among these people who inhabited a different social stratosphere. Their eyes met across the playground, and Grace Mitchell found herself studying the man who had risked his life for her daughter. He possessed no wealth, no connections, no sophisticated education that might make him useful to her business empire. But his eyes held something that all her money couldn't purchase. The genuine desire to protect a child simply because protecting children was the right thing to do. Emily clung to Daniel's hand with the desperate grip of someone who had discovered safety in an unsafe world. She looked up at him with wonder, as if seeing a real-life superhero for the first time. This reaction troubled Grace more than she cared to admit. Her daughter had never shown such trust toward Marcus, despite his impeccable credentials and years of faithful service. Josh appeared at his father's side, having witnessed the entire encounter with the wide eyes of childhood. He looked between his father and the elegantly dressed woman, beginning to understand that their simple playground visit had become something much more complex. The boy possessed his father's intuition for reading people, and he could see that the lady with the expensive clothes was measuring his dad against some invisible standard. Grace's gratitude expressed itself in the language she knew best. The offer of employment. She needed someone to protect Emily, and this man had already proven his willingness to sacrifice himself for her daughter's safety. The logic seemed unassailable, even if every rule of executive decision-making argued against hiring a mechanic as a bodyguard. Daniel's initial reaction was predictable disbelief followed by automatic refusal. He knew nothing about protection services or threat assessment or any of the sophisticated skills that Emily's situation demanded. His resume consisted of automotive repair certifications and letters of recommendation from garage owners, not tactical training or weapons expertise. The gulf between their worlds seemed impossible to bridge. But Emily's small hand remained firmly clasped in his, and her eyes pleaded with him in a way that transcended social boundaries and economic differences. She had found someone who made her feel safe, and 8-year-old logic suggested that safety was the only credential that truly mattered. Her trust became the argument that no amount of rational objection could overcome. Grace watched the interaction between her daughter and this unlikely protector, recognizing something she had forgotten existed. Emily laughed for the first time in months, her guardedness replaced by the kind of spontaneous joy that childhood should contain. If a mechanic from Queens could accomplish what trained professionals had failed to achieve, then perhaps conventional wisdom deserved reconsideration. The negotiation took place in Grace's penthouse that evening. After Emily had gone to bed and Josh had returned home with promises of explanation later, Daniel felt like an imposter surrounded by furniture that cost more than his annual salary, but Grace's desperation made her generous. She offered him 10 times his garage wages, a company apartment, and benefits that seemed too good to be true. Daniel's acceptance came with conditions that revealed his priorities. Josh would remain his primary responsibility, the job would end if it interfered with his son's needs, and he reserved the right to quit if the situation became more than he could handle. These demands might have seemed presumptuous from someone else, but coming from Daniel, they demonstrated the integrity that had motivated his playground heroics. The transformation from mechanic to bodyguard required more than a wardrobe change. Though Grace's personal shopper did replace Daniel's work clothes with suits appropriate for his new role. He learned to navigate the social dynamics of wealth, the subtle hierarchies that governed interactions in Grace's world. The way power expressed itself through gesture and tone rather than obvious display. Emily blossomed under Daniel's protection in ways that surprised everyone, including Grace herself. The quiet, withdrawn child began talking animatedly about school and friends, her personality emerging from the shell that anxiety and isolation had created. Daniel treated her like a regular kid rather than a billionaire's daughter, teaching her to skip stones and ride her bicycle without training wheels. Josh adapted to their changed circumstances with the resilience that children possess, though he struggled to understand why his father now wore expensive clothes and drove luxury cars. Daniel worked hard to maintain their relationship's essential character, ensuring that wealth didn't corrupt the simple bonds that had sustained them through difficult years. The first test of Daniel's capabilities came sooner than anyone expected. 3 men followed Emily's school car through Manhattan traffic, their coordination suggesting professional training rather than opportunistic crime. Daniel recognized the surveillance pattern from movies he'd watched, but his real-world experience consisted of exactly one playground confrontation. Nevertheless, when Emily's safety hung in the balance, uncertainty became irrelevant. The pursuit led through narrow streets, where expensive cars couldn't maneuver effectively, exactly the kind of environment where Daniel's mechanical knowledge provided unexpected advantages. He understood how engines performed under stress, knew which shortcuts would accommodate their vehicle's dimensions, could predict when pursuing cars would overheat or lose traction on challenging terrain. Emily remained calm throughout the chase, her trust in Daniel absolute despite the obvious danger. She had learned that adults often failed to keep their promises, but something about her new protector convinced her that his commitment was different. Her faith became a source of strength that carried Daniel through moments when his own confidence wavered. The confrontation ended in a parking garage, where Daniel's opponents expected to corner their prey. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who understood mechanical systems better than they understood psychology. Daniel used environmental advantages, fire exits, security cameras, structural support pillars to neutralize threats that training alone couldn't have overcome. Grace arrived at the scene as police officers took statements and paramedics treated minor injuries. She found Emily chattering excitedly about their adventure, describing Daniel's quick thinking and protective instincts, with the enthusiasm of someone recounting a thrilling movie. The child's excitement troubled Grace less than it should have, suggesting that danger had become normal in her daughter's life. That evening, as Emily slept peacefully in her bed, Grace and Daniel talked on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city lights. She shared her fears about the industrial espionage and corporate warfare that made normal life impossible, while he spoke about the challenges of single parenthood and the guilt that came from never feeling adequate to the task. Their conversation revealed the loneliness that success and failure could both create. Grace's wealth had isolated her from genuine relationships, surrounding her with people whose loyalty could be purchased rather than earned. Daniel's struggles had limited his social connections, leaving him too exhausted for romance and too proud to accept help from others. Emily's affection for Daniel grew stronger each day, creating complications that neither Grace nor Daniel had anticipated. The child began asking when Daniel would move into their apartment permanently, whether Josh could become her brother, why their family couldn't be complete the way other families were complete. Her questions revealed a depth of longing that broke both adults' hearts. Josh, meanwhile, observed the changes in his father's life with the wisdom that difficult circumstances often give children. He understood that their old life was ending, replaced by something more complex but potentially more rewarding. His acceptance of Grace and Emily demonstrated the same generous spirit that his father had shown on the playground. The investigation into Emily's would-be kidnappers revealed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate competition. Grace's latest acquisition had threatened entrenched interests worth billions of dollars, creating enemies who viewed violence as merely another business expense. Daniel found himself studying threat assessments and security briefings, trying to understand a world where children became pawns in games played by powerful adults. Marcus, the displaced bodyguard, struggled with unemployment and professional humiliation. His failure at the playground had destroyed his reputation in security circles, leaving him vulnerable to approaches from less scrupulous employers. The resentment and financial pressure created opportunities that Grace's enemies were quick to exploit. The betrayal came during a seemingly routine school pickup, when Marcus appeared unexpectedly and suggested a route change that would avoid construction delays. Daniel's mechanical background had taught him to question unexpected modifications to established procedures. But Emily's enthusiasm for seeing her former bodyguard overcame his instinctive caution. The ambush location had been chosen carefully, a warehouse district where screams wouldn't carry, and police response times exceeded 10 minutes. Marcus had provided detailed information about security protocols and timing, ensuring that Grace's enemies could execute their plan without interference. Only Daniel's presence represented an unpredictable variable that their careful planning hadn't considered. The battle that followed tested every limit of Daniel's courage and determination. He faced trained killers with nothing more than improvised weapons and desperate inspiration, fighting not for money or glory but for the life of a child who had learned to trust him completely. Emily's safety became the only calculation that mattered. Grace arrived as the warehouse filled with smoke from overturned equipment and damaged electrical systems. She found Daniel bleeding from multiple wounds but still shielding Emily from harm, his body positioned between her daughter and the chaos surrounding them. Marcus lay unconscious nearby, his betrayal having earned him nothing but contempt from both sides of the conflict. The aftermath brought police sirens and news cameras, federal agents and forensic specialists who transformed the warehouse into a crime scene that would be studied for months. Grace used her influence to minimize media coverage, protecting both Emily and Daniel from the celebrity that heroism often creates in modern society. Emily's reaction to the trauma surprised the child psychologists whom Grace hired to assess her emotional state. Rather than withdrawal or anxiety, the 8-year-old displayed remarkable resilience, as if Daniel's protection had given her confidence that would endure long after the danger passed. Her trust in him had been tested by genuine peril and emerged even stronger. Daniel's physical injuries healed faster than his emotional ones. He struggled with nightmares and flashbacks, the delayed stress reaction that many heroes experience once immediate danger subsides. Josh provided comfort, with the wisdom of someone who understood that strength sometimes required acknowledging weakness. The legal proceedings that followed revealed the full scope of the conspiracy against Grace's business empire. Competitors had been willing to harm a child to protect market share worth billions of dollars, demonstrating a moral bankruptcy that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Daniel's testimony helped secure convictions that would keep Emily's would-be kidnappers in prison for decades. Grace offered Daniel rewards that reflected both her gratitude and her wealth, investments that would secure Josh's education, real estate that would eliminate housing concerns forever, business opportunities that could transform their family's entire trajectory. Daniel accepted only what he needed to provide Josh with stability, declining offers that seemed too generous for simply doing what any decent person would do. The media attention that followed portrayed Daniel as an unlikely hero, the blue-collar worker who had protected the billionaire's daughter through courage rather than training. Magazine articles and television interviews explored the social dynamics that had brought them together, though Daniel consistently deflected credit toward the simple obligation that parents have to protect all children. Emily's attachment to Daniel deepened into something approaching filial love, creating situations that both warmed and worried Grace. The child asked increasingly pointed questions about families and adoption, about whether people could choose their relatives the way they chose their friends. Her innocent inquiries forced both adults to confront feelings they hadn't acknowledged even to themselves. Josh integrated into their expanded family unit with remarkable ease, his natural empathy helping him understand Emily's need for stability and affection. The 10-year-old became a protective older brother, teaching Emily to navigate playground politics and stand up to bullies with the confidence that came from knowing someone cared about her welfare. The investigation's conclusion brought closure to the legal aspects of Emily's endangerment, but opened questions about their future that none of them could answer easily. Grace's world remained dangerous, filled with competitors who viewed violence as acceptable business strategy. Emily needed protection that extended beyond physical security to emotional support and genuine affection. Daniel's transformation from mechanic to bodyguard had revealed capabilities he hadn't known he possessed. But more importantly, it had shown him the possibility of family bonds that transcended biology and social status. Emily and Josh had become siblings in everything but law, their connection based on shared experiences, rather than shared genetics. The resolution came not through dramatic gestures or elaborate proposals but through the quiet accumulation of daily intimacies that define real families. Grace found herself consulting Daniel about business decisions that affected Emily's security, valuing his practical wisdom alongside expert advice. Daniel discovered that his protective instincts extended naturally to Grace herself, encompassing the woman as well as the child. Emily's 8th birthday celebration took place in the same playground where their story had begun, transformed now from a site of danger into a symbol of new beginnings. She blew out candles on a cake that bore no corporate logo or designer decoration, just the simple message that proclaimed her part of a family that had chosen each other rather than merely inherited each other. The guest list included Josh's friends from school, alongside Emily's private academy classmates, creating social mixing that would have been impossible in Grace's previous life. Daniel watched children from different economic backgrounds playing together without awareness of the barriers that separated their parents' worlds, reminded that innocence often provided wisdom that sophistication couldn't match. Grace's wedding proposal came during Emily's party, delivered with characteristic directness but heartfelt sincerity. She offered Daniel partnership rather than employment, suggesting that their business relationship had evolved into something that deserved legal recognition and emotional commitment. His acceptance reflected not just personal affection but recognition that their children deserved the stability that marriage could provide. The ceremony took place 6 months later in the same church where Daniel had been baptized as an infant, surrounded by mechanics and billionaires who had learned to appreciate each other's essential humanity. Emily served as flower girl while Josh carried rings, both children beaming with the satisfaction of having helped create the family they had dreamed about. The wedding reception featured cuisine from Daniel's neighborhood deli alongside dishes prepared by Grace's personal chef, symbolizing the cultural integration that had become their family's strength. Guests danced to music that ranged from classical to classic rock, reflecting tastes that spanned social boundaries previously considered insurmountable. Their honeymoon destination was chosen by democratic vote. A cabin in the mountains where cell phone reception was spotty, and the nearest business meeting was hundreds of miles away. Emily learned to fish while Josh mastered campfire cooking, both children discovering that happiness could be found in simplicity as easily as in sophistication. The family's new dynamic required adjustments from everyone involved. Grace learned to appreciate the wisdom that came from manual labor and practical problem-solving, while Daniel discovered that business strategy shared many similarities with mechanical troubleshooting. Emily and Josh negotiated the delicate balance between sibling rivalry and mutual protection. Their first Christmas together established traditions that honored both their backgrounds, combining Grace's elegant decorating with Daniel's homemade ornaments, expensive gifts with handcrafted surprises. The tree stood in their living room like a symbol of successful integration, beautiful precisely because it reflected multiple perspectives rather than single vision. Daniel's former colleagues at the garage remained important parts of their extended family, providing Josh with male role models who understood the value of honest work and personal integrity. Grace's business associates gradually accepted Daniel's presence, recognizing that his insights often cut through complexity that sophisticated analysis couldn't penetrate. The security threats that had brought them together never entirely disappeared, but they became manageable through vigilance rather than fear. Daniel's protection of Emily evolved from desperate improvisation to systematic preparation, his natural instincts enhanced by training that professional experts provided. Emily grew up knowing that danger existed but confident that she was loved enough to be kept safe. Years later, when Emily graduated from college with honors in mechanical engineering, her choice of career surprised nobody who knew their family's story. She had learned from both parents that problems could be solved through persistence and intelligence, that protection meant understanding how systems worked rather than simply reacting to their failures. Josh followed his own path into social work, motivated by the generosity that his father had shown toward a frightened child on a playground. His career helping vulnerable families reflected lessons learned about the importance of stepping forward when others stepped back, about the courage required to bridge differences that society claimed were permanent. Daniel and Grace aged together into roles that felt natural rather than imposed, their relationship deepened by shared challenges and mutual respect. The playground where they had met remained their favorite place for family gatherings. A reminder that extraordinary love often grew from ordinary moments when people chose to care about strangers. The warehouse where Daniel had fought for Emily's life was demolished and replaced with a community center that provided after-school programs for children from all economic backgrounds. The family's donation had funded the project, but Daniel insisted that no plaque commemorate their contribution. True heroism, he believed, worked best when it remained anonymous. Emily's children would grow up hearing stories about their grandfather's courage and their grandmother's determination, about the day when love conquered fear and family was chosen rather than inherited. The playground where it all began would echo with new laughter, fresh proof that protecting children remained the most important work that adults could ever do. The swing where Emily had sat alone still moved in the breeze, waiting for the next child who needed someone to step forward and say that her safety mattered more than personal risk. Daniel's legacy lived not in headlines or awards but in the understanding that heroism began with the simple decision to care about others' welfare more than one's own comfort. Their story ended where it had begun, in a place where children played while adults watched over them with the vigilance that love demanded. The circle was complete, but the cycle continued, as it always would, wherever parents understood that protecting the innocent was not just their job but their privilege. On autumn afternoons when the light fell golden across the playground, observers might notice a family that seemed to span different worlds yet somehow belonged together perfectly. They would see children who played with absolute confidence in their safety, parents who watched with the contentment that came from having found exactly what they hadn't known they were seeking. And if those observers looked closely enough, they might understand that the greatest adventures began not with grand gestures but with simple acts of kindness performed when kindness was needed most.